Think of it as a tawny ocean stopped in time. A vast landscape of grass, here and there mustache-like strips of trees, darkening creek beds or running along the ridges, like an old headdress unfurled in wind. Today, the place where the Wounded Knee Massacre took place looks remarkably similar to what it did in early winter of 1890. A featureless shallow valley and a seemingly unending field of prairie grass that, on a gray day, weaves itself almost inconspicuously into the cloudy sky at its reaches. On December 28, 1890, 4 Hotchkiss guns, the Sioux called them the guns that fire in the morning and kill the next day, stood on a small white-cap hill amid this arid ocean. All 4 aimed down into the camp of a Miniconjou chief named Satanka, or Bigfoot. There, 300 men, women, and children were camped, hoping to reach Pine Ridge Agency the next day. More than a century later, it's almost impossible to stand on that small hill and look down into the valley of Wounded Knee Creek and imagine what the place must have looked like so full of people. But try. Today, a single battered billboard offers the only available outline of the story, the word battle crossed out and massacre scribbled in roughly above it. Otherwise, there's little to mark this spot. But try to imagine what this yawning, empty space must have looked like. A couple hundred Lakota just beneath the promontory where we're standing. Their worn and ripped teepees thrown up quickly, campfires floating thin plumes of smoke. These folks have been hungry for days and tired, having just marched hundreds of miles south towards Chief Red Cloud at the Pine Ridge Agency where they thought they'd be safe. But there's more. There's far more. Across the ravine west, maybe a half-mile away on another hill, sits a sprawling encampment of several hundred troops under command of Colonel James W. Forsyth, the largest military encampment since the Civil War. The scene is remarkable. Doubtless, that many people assembled at this remote spot on the Dakota Prairie has not happened frequently, if ever, since. If it's difficult for you to imagine, just picture a campground of nearly 1,000 people in tents and then cut down all the trees. Bigfoot's people were dancers, ghost dancers, strong believers in a frenetic, mystic ceremony, a hobgoblin of Christianity, mysticism, native ritual, and sheer desperation. If they would dance, they thought Christ would return because he'd heard their prayers and felt their suffering. When he'd come for them, he'd bring with them the old ones, hence the ghost dance. And the buffalo would return. Once again, the people could take up their beloved way of life. If they would dance, a cloud of dust from the new heaven and new earth would swallow the Wasiku, the white men, all of them. And if they would dance, their hunger would be satiated, their desperation comforted. The ghost dance, a ritual of what Ian Fraser calls the first American religion, is only one of the many causes which led to the massacre at Wounded Knee, but for people of faith it merits a closer look. There was no dancing here on the night before the massacre, December 28, 1890, but for almost a year the Messiah craze had spread throughout the newly sectioned reservations, as unstoppable as prairie fire. A committee of Sioux holy men had returned from Nevada where they'd met Wavoka, the Paiute who'd seen the original vision, and they returned as disciples of a new religion. Wavoka designed the ritual from his own visions. Erect a sapling in the middle of an open area like the one in front of us now, the tree, a familiar symbol from rituals like the Sundance, then banned by reservation agents. Then purge yourselves, enter sweat lodges. Prostrate yourself before Wankantanka, the great mysterious. Show your humility. Often warriors would cut out pieces of their own flesh and lay them at the base of that sapling to bear witness to their selflessness. And then dance. Women and men together, something rare in Sioux religious tradition. Dance around that sapling totem. Dance and dance and dance and don't stop until you fall from physical exertion and spiritual plenitude. Dance until the mind numbs and the spirit emerges. Dance into frenzy. Dance into ecstasy. Now look back down into the valley and imagine 300 men and women being slain by the spirit, most of them writhing in fine dust. Such mass frenzy made white people of every denomination or political persuasion shudder. To them it seemed madness on a cosmic scale, hence the Messiah craze. The exaltation of the ghost dance was the vision given to those who fell in frenzy. When they would recover their senses, each of them would reveal what he or she had seen, a kind of collective vision. Life would be good, rich, abundant, everything. The coming of the white people had ended. Jesus Christ, rejected by his own, had heard the voice of the people suffering and would bring them joy. The great underlying principle of the ghost dance doctrine, says James Mooney in his rich study written already in 1896, is that the whole Indian race, living and dead, will be reunited upon a regenerated earth to live a life of aboriginal happiness, forever free from death and disease and misery. It was that simple and that compelling. It was a vision of heaven. For me, as a white man and a Christian, it's not pleasant to admit that in the summer of 1890, the sheer desperation of Native people, fueled by poverty and malnutrition, the near death of their culture, created a tragically false religion that played a significant role in what we've come to call simply Wounded Knee. Throughout the West, the whole First Nation danced. What was peculiar to the Sioux, however, was this solitary tenet. Those who wore the ghost shirt or the ghost dress, the prescribed apparel of the faith, could assume themselves impervious to bluecoat bullets. Dancers could not die. They were holy. It would be dead wrong to assume that that belief or any other created the Messiah craze as the single cause for the horror that happened here in December 1890. Others are far more important. Disappearance of the buffalo, the unceasing trek of white settlers into traditional Lakota land, a long history of broken treaties, distrust on every side, the searing memory of Custer's last stand, and perhaps most of all, the inability of two peoples to understand each other. So when you look down on the shallow valley of the Wounded Knee, bear in mind that what happened here is the confluence of many motives, some of them even well-meaning, but all of them finally tragic. Here we are. Look around. If you stand on this promontory in the summer, the heat can be oppressive, but on a good day you might be surrounded by a couple dozen tourists, that's all. Wounded Knee doesn't exactly border the Black Hills, and it's not on the way to Yellowstone. It's really not on the way to anything. Right now you're in the heart of flyover America, many millions of Americans never coming closer to the shallow valley than, say, Chicago. Any time of year, the twisted vapor trails of jets on their way to LAX or LaGuardia float like ribbons in the genial sky. In the late fall or muddy spring or cold winter, like that December day in 1890, it's likely you'll stand very much alone at Wounded Knee. Cars and trucks navigate the reservation roads that cross almost directly at the point of battle, but for the most of the year, a visit here is unlike a visit to any other North American historic battlefield. Gettysburg offers an aging but impressive cyclorama, a remarkable circular painting 356 feet by 26. Little Bighorn's Visitor Center sells helpful interpretive audio tapes to use as you tour several miles of battlefield from the air-conditioned comfort of your minivan. But if you want to know what you can about Wounded Knee, the only storyteller there all year round is the wind. Just imagine the encampment before you and keep in mind the despair and the poverty, the hopelessness of the dancers. To live was now no more than to endure the purposeless indignity of breath, says John G. Neihardt in The Twilight of the Sioux. Millions of buffalo once roamed here, the staple of existence for thousands of nomadic native people, the soul of their culture and faith. By 1890, they were gone. In North Dakota's horrible winter of 1996, while thousands of cattle died in the monstrous cold, it's reported that only one bison perished. Once the buffalo ruled on the plains. In all the openness around you, they stretch out in almost forever in every direction. But try to imagine what it must have been like to stand on this promontory and look over herds so large you could see the mass ripple as they shifted slightly when detecting human scent, almost like watching wind on water. That's what's gone. To the Sioux, the hunt was not only manhood's proving ground, but a celebration for the family, often opened and closed with prayer. Few 19th century white people could understand that the disappearance of the buffalo seemed to many Plains Indians almost the death of God. I don't believe I still can, try as I might. But if I stand here on the promontory at Wounded Knee and remind all that is white within me of grinding poverty and exhaustive dissolution of a way of life and the seeming death of God, I can, perhaps, begin to understand the frantic hope inspired by the ghost dance. Today, right behind you, you'll see fenced-in enclosure where a granite monument, 9 feet tall, lists the names of a few of those killed here. Chief Bigfoot, it says, and then lists Mr. Shadow Bear, Long Bull, White American, Blue Coyote, Ghost Horse, Living Bear, Afraid of Bear, Young Afraid of Bear, Yellow Robe, Wounded Hand, Red Eagle, and just a few more. Estimates vary on the number of dead buried where you're standing, but most think 150 or so frozen bodies were dumped into the mass grave beneath the cordon of cement. No ceremony then, native or white. It was just a dump. On the other side of the stone, there's an inscription, still visible 70 years after the marker was placed where you're standing. This monument is erected by surviving relatives and other Ogallala and Cheyenne River Sioux Indians in memory of Chief Bigfoot Massacre, December 29, 1890. Colonel Forsyth in command of U.S. troops. Bigfoot was a great chief to the Sioux Indians. He often said, "I will stand in peace till my last day comes." He did many good and brave deeds for the white man and the red man. Many innocent women and children who knew no wrong died here. But what exactly did happen on the morning of December 29, 1890? With nothing to stop it, sound travels easily on a landscape this barren. So imagine the bleat of reveille cutting through the morning cold. It's 8 o'clock and the sun rises magnificently, albeit late, winter solstice just a few days behind. Many of the women, some of them singing, are packing for the 17-mile trip to Pine Ridge, where they anticipate meeting relatives and friends. Children play innocently around the ragged teepees and the wagons, and for the first morning in many, most have eaten well. By Indian messenger, Colonel Forsyth, the commanding officer, calls the men of Bigfoot's band to come to parley directly southeast of us at the spot where the chief's tent stands, maybe 300 yards down the hill. Spread around the entire encampment like a huge lariat, even beyond the dozens of Indian ponies just west of Bigfoot's camp and the ravine behind it, 76 unmounted sentries equally spaced watch the movement. On the rise beyond the ravine and set against the horizon, a long line of mounted bluecoats wait menacingly just in front of them, some several dozen of the cavalry's Indian scouts. From the vantage point of the soldiers, the field seems well in hand, the position geometrically arranged to prevent escape. There is no chaos yet. As they were commanded, something close to 100 men, no one knows for sure, from Bigfoot's band take their places in the council circle. Behind them, those lines of bluecoats move quickly to separate the men from their women and children. Command is given to disarm. In the face of such untoward odds, the Sioux men are wary. Not only does the positioning all around them seem ominous, but to a culture created on institutional violence, a boy, after all, becomes a man by proving himself in battle. Giving up one means to fight is really giving up oneself. What's more, they'd been promised the day before that they could keep their arms until they arrived at Pine Ridge. Troops are dispatched to search and seize what arms they can turn up in the encampment behind them. What happens is not pleasant. The women do not take kindly to their mistreatment. Sometimes brutal ways of the bluecoats plunder themselves and their possessions. When the soldiers return, they have more guns, but also axes and knives, bows and arrows, tent stakes, even beadwork awls.